What happens when humanity's thirst for knowledge awakens something far beyond its understanding? A force that has been dormant for centuries, now unleashed and learning with every step we take. Mars, once a symbol of hope, has become the battlefield for a struggle no one saw coming. Can Mark, the last human on Mars, survive this alien threat, or will he become the catalyst for humanity's downfall? The faint light of dawn filtered through the dusty Martian atmosphere, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The silence on Mars was deafening, broken only by the distant whisper of the wind carrying the red dust of the planet. There was no hum of machinery, no sound of bustling life, only the haunting echo of what once was. In the midst of this stillness, a lone figure moved slowly across the desolate terrain. Mark, the last human alive on Mars, stood on the edge of a ruined colony. His breathing was slow, deliberate, the weight of the world, or rather, the weight of an entire dying colony, pressing down on him. He was the last of his kind, the last survivor of a failed mission, a mission meant to be a new beginning, not an end. As the sun rose higher, its rays seemed to offer a brief moment of warmth, a fleeting reminder of the Earth Mark once knew. But that warmth did little to ease the coldness that had settled in his heart. His eyes scanned the remnants of the colony, the broken domes, shattered windows, and the rusting skeletons of machinery. What was once a thriving community of scientists, explorers, and engineers was now nothing more than a collection of empty husks. Mark adjusted his helmet, feeling the weight of the visor pressing against his face. The air was thin, dry, and devoid of life. But he had no choice but to keep moving forward. The path ahead was uncertain, and yet it was the only path he had. There was no turning back. His mission was survival. For a long moment, Mark stood in silence, letting the weight of the world, or what remained of it, settle on his shoulders. The mission had failed. The colony had been wiped out by a deadly virus, a virus that spread quickly, silently, and with devastating efficiency. Within weeks, the inhabitants were dead. Mark was alone, the last human left on Mars. The wind picked up, swirling dust around him as he walked. His destination was a small outpost, one of the last places that might still hold some useful supplies. His oxygen tank was running low, and he needed to find a way to contact Earth. It had been months since his last communication, and though he had tried, every attempt had been in vain. The communication systems were damaged, and the virus had left nothing untouched. No one to repair the systems. He pushed forward, his boots crunching on the dry soil of Mars. As he walked, the memories of the people he had lost flooded his mind. Faces of friends, colleagues, and strangers who had once been full of life, now lost to time. He could almost hear their laughter, their voices, their promises of a better future on Mars. But that future was gone now. Mark's mind wandered back to the first day they arrived on Mars. The excitement in the air, the feeling of history being made. The colonists had come to Mars with big dreams, to terraform the planet, to build a new home for humanity. They had believed in a future of endless possibilities. But now, all that remained were the ruins of their failed dreams. He reached the outpost after a few hours of walking. The small structure was half buried in red dust, its exterior covered in the scars of time and neglect. He approached the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the outpost was as he remembered it, dark, cold, and silent. The only sound was the hum of the life support system, barely functioning. Mark moved to the control panel and began working on the damaged systems. His hands trembled slightly, a mixture of exhaustion and the weight of the task ahead. He needed to get the communication system working, but every time he thought he was close, something else would fail. He wiped the sweat from his brow and focused, trying not to let the crushing loneliness overwhelm him. "Come on, just work," he muttered under his breath, his voice cracking. It had been so long since he had spoken aloud, and the sound of his own voice sent a shiver down his spine. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set on the horizon, Mark finally managed to restore a weak connection. His heart raced as the screen flickered to life. There was a signal. Faint, but there. He reached out and activated the communication system, sending a transmission back to Earth. "This is Mark, mission commander of the Mars colonization project," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet desperation. "Is anyone out there? Please respond. I am the last one. I need help." He waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then the screen flickered again, and for a brief moment he thought he saw a figure, a shadow moving across the screen. His breath caught in his throat. Was someone out there? But the moment passed, and the screen went black. No response. The connection was lost. Mark slumped back in his seat, staring at the now dark screen. His hope, so briefly ignited, was extinguished once more. The isolation, the loneliness, the endless silence, it was all too much to bear. But Mark knew that he couldn't afford to give up. His survival depended on hope, on the belief that there was still a chance that someone, somewhere, might still be looking for him. With a sigh, Mark stood up and gathered his equipment. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more dangers. But there was no turning back. He was the last human on Mars, and it was up to him to survive, to carry on the legacy of those who came before him. As he left the outpost and stepped back into the Martian night, Mark took one last look at the faint stars above. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before him, but within him there was a flicker of light, a flicker of hope. The Martian winds howled as they kicked up the dusty red soil, swirling it around Mark as he trudged forward into the unknown. His steps were heavy, each one feeling more laborious than the last. He had not slept for days, and the fatigue was beginning to take its toll. His body was exhausted, his mind even more so. The silence of Mars was overwhelming, but it was the quiet that gnawed at him the most. It was not the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. There were no birds, no animals, not even the distant hum of a working machine. Only the endless stretch of barren land, a cold and lifeless desert. Mark's destination was a research outpost, located a few hundred kilometers away from his current position. He'd heard rumors about it before, rumors that there might still be valuable equipment or supplies there. Supplies he desperately needed if he was going to survive much longer. It was an old station, long abandoned after the outbreak of the virus, but it was his only hope. As he walked, his thoughts wandered, tracing back to the early days of the colony. He could remember the excitement that had filled the air, the enthusiasm in every voice. They were pioneers, venturing into the unknown with dreams of transforming Mars into a new home for humanity. They had believed they were part of something monumental, something that would change the course of history. But now, all of that felt like a distant memory. The Martian landscape stretched out before him, empty and unforgiving, as if mocking their ambition. With each step, Mark struggled to push away the gnawing feelings of regret. He had lost so much, his friends, his colleagues, the future that they had all worked so hard to build. The weight of the solitude pressed down on him, but he refused to let it break him. He couldn't. He was the last one, the last human on Mars. He paused for a moment, breathing heavily, and looked out over the horizon. The sun had dipped below the red dunes, casting the planet into an eerie twilight. The air was getting colder, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. He had to keep moving. His suit's display flickered, showing a low battery warning. The oxygen tank was barely half full, and he could feel his energy reserves draining. There was no room for error. He couldn't afford to waste time or resources. He had to make it to the outpost before his suit failed, or he'd be just another ghost in the Martian desert. With renewed determination, Mark continued on his journey. The wind whipped around him, biting at the exposed parts of his suit, but he pressed forward, step after step. As he walked, he scanned the barren landscape, hoping for a glimpse of the station in the distance. After what felt like hours, the outpost finally came into view. It was a small, weathered structure, half buried in Martian dust. It looked abandoned, just like the rest of the colony, but it was his only hope. He reached the entrance and struggled with the door, pushing it open with all his remaining strength. The interior was dark, the air stale, but it still held some semblance of life. The faint hum of the life support system was still audible, though weak. Mark made his way through the dark corridors, his flashlight flickering as he scanned for anything useful. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved deeper into the station. The walls were covered in a layer of dust, but he could make out some of the equipment still intact. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a glimmer of hope. He found a control room near the back of the station. The console was covered in grime, but the display still functioned, albeit faintly. Mark pressed a few buttons, hoping to access the station's systems, but there was no response. Frustration began to rise within him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control now. As he sat in front of the console trying to troubleshoot the malfunctioning systems, a thought crossed his mind. He had been trying to survive, focusing only on the immediate needs, the next meal, the next supply run, but he had not stopped to think about the bigger picture. What was the purpose of surviving if there was no future to build? Was there even a point in continuing on like this, without any hope of rescue, without anyone to talk to? The isolation was beginning to gnaw at him, pushing him into a corner he wasn't sure he could escape. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. Why am I still here? He wondered. What's the point of going on? But then, something in the back of his mind stirred. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The reason he kept going, even when everything seemed lost. It was the same reason he had come to Mars in the first place, the pursuit of knowledge, the desire to push humanity beyond its limits. They had come to Mars to learn, to explore, to understand the universe. And even if the colony had failed, even if everyone was gone, that pursuit of knowledge was still important. He had to keep going, not just for survival, but for the future, for the hope that someday someone would return. Someone would pick up where they had left off. Mark returned his focus to the console, ignoring the fatigue and the doubt creeping into his thoughts. He worked tirelessly, trying every command, every troubleshooting method he knew. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen flickered to life. A weak transmission signal appeared on the screen, the static slowly clearing as Mark's heart raced. It wasn't much, but it was a sign. Someone had sent a signal from Earth. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. It wasn't a rescue, but it was the first sign of life beyond Mars in months. The message was brief, but it was enough. A voice calm and steady crackled through the speakers. Mark, if you're receiving this, we've been trying to reach you. We know you're still out there. Help is on the way. For the first time in months, Mark allowed himself a smile. There was hope. There was a chance. Mars might still be a desolate wasteland, but for him, it was no longer the end. As the message faded and the static returned, Mark took a deep breath. He had to survive just a little longer. The journey was far from over, but now he had something to hold on to. Hope. And with that hope, Mark prepared for what was to come. He had learned in this vast emptiness that survival was not just about breathing, it was about purpose. And now he had a new purpose: to hold on, to wait, and to ensure that Mars was not the final chapter of humanity's story. Mark sat alone in the dimly lit control room, the silence pressing down on him like a heavy weight. His fingers hovered over the console, still warm from the transmission he had just received. The message from Earth had been brief, but it was enough to spark a renewed fire within him. Help is on the way. That simple phrase, more than any words, had given him something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: hope. But hope came with a price. The days since the message had come through had been filled with relentless work. The station, once a hub of scientific activity, was now little more than a graveyard of discarded equipment and forgotten dreams. Mark had spent countless hours going through the old logs, trying to piece together what had happened in the wake of the virus outbreak. There were fragments of messages, some hopeful, some despairing, but the most chilling were the ones that were cut off abruptly, leaving no explanation as to what had happened to those who had sent them. One log stood out to Mark, buried deep in the files, dated weeks before the outbreak had begun. It was a message from Dr. Elena Harris, the lead scientist of the Mars Colonization Project. It was brief, but it held a disturbing revelation. We've made a discovery. I'm not sure if it's a breakthrough or a mistake, but what we found beneath the surface of Mars, it's unlike anything we've encountered before. The data is being sent to Earth for analysis, but we believe this could be the key to terraforming Mars. I'll update the team as soon as we have more information. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Beneath the surface of Mars, what could they have discovered? And more importantly, what had happened to Dr. Harris and her team? The message had been cut off, the final sentence trailing off into static. The implications of this message weighed heavily on Mark's mind. Was the discovery connected to the virus? Had it somehow been unleashed, causing the downfall of the colony? As he pondered these questions, the air in the station seemed to grow heavier. The silence around him was suffocating. Mark had spent so long isolated on this planet, surrounded by only the ruins of human ambition, that the thought of something deeper beneath the surface of Mars, a hidden force, was both thrilling and terrifying. What if that discovery had been more than just a scientific breakthrough? What if it had been a mistake that led to the demise of everyone here? Determined to find more answers, Mark navigated through the station's old archives. His eyes scanned the logs, his heart pounding with anticipation as he searched for any mention of the mysterious discovery. After hours of sifting through the data, he finally found something, a series of encrypted files buried deep within the station's security system. He hesitated for a moment. Decrypting the files was no easy task, and it would take time. His resources were already stretched thin, and the Mars environment was unforgiving. But curiosity drove him, and the thought that this could hold the key to understanding what had happened, and perhaps even a chance for survival, was too powerful to ignore. Mark sat at the console, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. The encryption algorithms were complicated, but he had learned a thing or two about hacking and bypassing security measures during his time on Mars. As the seconds ticked by, the screen flickered and flashed, the progress bar inching forward. Then, with a final click, the files decrypted and the data appeared on the screen. The first file was a journal entry from Dr. Harris herself, written just days before the virus had begun spreading. The discovery beneath Mars's surface is beyond our understanding. We've found something alien. It's an energy source, unlike anything we've seen before. It seems to be alive, or at least reactive, to human presence. We've tried to isolate it, but every attempt has led to strange reactions. The virus outbreak started shortly after our first contact with the energy source. Some of us think it's a coincidence, others believe it's more than that. I don't know what to believe anymore. I'm writing this as a precaution. If something happens to me, if I don't make it through this, I want someone to know the truth. Mark's heart raced as he read the entry. An alien energy source? Alive? He could barely wrap his mind around it. Had this strange, reactive force been responsible for the virus that wiped out the colony? Was it a biological weapon, or something far more insidious? The journal entry ended abruptly, leaving more questions than answers. The final lines were chilling, though. If you find this, you need to get out of here. Don't try to study it. Don't try to contact it. It's not what we thought it was. We've disturbed something ancient, something that was never meant to be awakened. And now we are paying the price. Mark stared at the screen, the weight of Dr. Harris's words sinking in. This was no ordinary discovery. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a warning. The virus that had decimated the colony, the chaos, the destruction, it all seemed to be connected to this alien energy source. It had to be. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle. The discovery had been hidden, buried deep beneath the surface of Mars, and now it seemed like it was connected to everything that had gone wrong. The virus, the isolation, the fear, it all stemmed from something alien, something unknowable. Mark had always known that his survival depended on finding answers, but now he realized that his survival might not be the only thing at stake. If the alien energy source was truly what Dr. Harris had described, then it could pose a danger far beyond Mars. It could threaten Earth itself. With renewed determination, Mark knew what he had to do. He couldn't just sit here and wait for rescue. He had to find the source of the energy. He had to understand what it was and what it wanted. And so Mark began preparing for the journey. The outpost was only the beginning. His true mission had just begun. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was on the edge of discovering something that could change the fate of humanity, if it didn't destroy them first. As he set the coordinates for the deep Martian cave system where the energy source was believed to be located, Mark felt a sense of urgency rise within him. The truth was out there, hidden beneath the surface of Mars, and he was going to find it. Mark stood at the edge of the outpost, staring into the distance, where the Martian landscape stretched endlessly before him. The wind howled, kicking up swirls of red dust, but his mind was far from the harsh conditions of the planet. He had just uncovered a truth so disturbing that it left him with more questions than answers. The alien energy source buried beneath Mars, could it be the root cause of the virus that wiped out the colony? Could it be sentient? And if so, what kind of power could it possess? His thoughts raced as he checked his gear. The journey ahead would be treacherous, but he had no choice. The next step in his survival depended on finding the source of that energy. If he was to get any answers, and maybe even a chance of survival, he needed to follow the trail Dr. Harris had left behind. The files, the journals, the warnings, everything pointed to the same place, the deep Martian caves. The cave system wasn't far from the outpost. It was an ancient, labyrinthine network that had been mapped by the first colonists years ago. At first, it had been deemed uninhabitable, but the reports had always hinted at something peculiar hidden within its dark recesses. Now Mark knew that whatever was down there had played a pivotal role in the colony's downfall. He set off towards the caves, his boots crunching on the dry Martian soil, the weight of the mission heavy on his shoulders. The air felt thinner the farther he moved from the station, and his suit's oxygen levels gradually began to drop. But there was no turning back. He had learned not to waste a single moment, not when time was so precious. With each step, the sense of urgency grew stronger, pulsing through his veins. As Mark approached the entrance to the caves, the landscape shifted. The dry red plains gave way to jagged rocks and deep fissures in the ground. The caves loomed before him, their dark, yawning mouths like the gates to another world. The rocky walls of the entrance were covered with strange patterns, lines, symbols, and designs that seemed unnatural, as though they had been carved into the stone long before humanity had arrived on Mars. The thought crossed his mind. Could these markings be the work of an ancient civilization? Or was the alien energy source itself responsible? Taking a deep breath, Mark steadied his nerves and stepped into the darkness. The air inside the cave was cool and still, but the silence was thick, oppressive. His flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing twisted rock formations and deep crevices in the floor. He could hear the faint hum of his equipment, the only sound in the vast emptiness. The deeper he went, the more claustrophobic the tunnel became. The walls seemed to close in around him, and a strange sensation crept up his spine, as though he were being watched. Hours passed as Mark navigated the winding tunnels, following the rough maps he had salvaged from the outpost's archives. The further he went, the more bizarre the landscape became. He passed through narrow chambers that opened into vast caverns, some of which held strange mineral deposits that glowed faintly in the dark. The glow was eerie, almost otherworldly. Was it connected to the energy source? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark reached a massive underground cavern. The air here was thick with the scent of something ancient, something alive. In the center of the cavern, a pulsating glow emanated from the ground. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but as Mark drew closer, the glow intensified, casting long shadows across the walls of the cave. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the source of the light. There, embedded in the rock, was a strange crystalline structure. It was unlike anything Mark had ever seen. The crystals were translucent, shimmering with an unnatural light. They seemed to hum, vibrating with energy. The closer Mark got, the more the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, as though the very core of the planet was reacting to his presence. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't understand what he was seeing, but there was no mistaking it. This was the energy source that Dr. Harris had warned about, and now it was right in front of him. He carefully moved closer, his suit's sensors scanning the area. His instruments couldn't quite explain what was happening. There was no radiation, no detectable energy field, but the sensation in the air was unmistakable. It was as if the very environment was alive, responding to his presence. Reaching out, Mark hesitated for a moment. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but the temptation to touch it was overwhelming. With a deep breath, he extended his gloved hand and placed it against one of the crystalline formations. The moment his hand made contact, the cavern seemed to come alive. The crystals began to pulse more rapidly, the light growing brighter and the hum growing louder. Mark pulled his hand back in shock, but the energy seemed to follow him, the crystals vibrating in response to his movements. He felt a sudden jolt, a strange sensation, as if the energy was reaching out, trying to connect with him, or perhaps communicate with him. A rush of visions flooded his mind. Images of vast alien landscapes, strange beings that moved in ways he couldn't comprehend, and technology that seemed far beyond anything humanity had ever created. He saw flashes of distant stars, planets in the throes of destruction, and then, finally, the image of a figure standing before a vast, glowing structure, something that seemed to be the source of the energy. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving Mark breathless and disoriented. He stumbled back, clutching his helmet as if the world around him was spinning. What had just happened? Had he made contact with the energy? Was this what had caused the virus outbreak? Or was there something even more sinister at play? Mark's thoughts were interrupted by a low rumble, a tremor that shook the cavern. He glanced around in alarm. The ground beneath him cracked, and the sound of something shifting deep within the cave filled the air. The energy was reacting to him, responding to his presence in ways he couldn't understand. The cavern began to shake violently, the crystals pulsing erratically. Mark knew that he had to leave, and quickly. With his heart racing, Mark turned and sprinted back towards the cave's entrance, the tremors growing stronger with each passing second. The alien energy was awakening, and whatever it was, it didn't want him there. As he emerged into the open air, gasping for breath, Mark looked back at the cave. The glowing crystals flickered one last time before the ground seemed to swallow them whole. The cavern collapsed, burying the mysterious energy source deep beneath the Martian surface once more. Mark stood there, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He had made contact with something that was far beyond his understanding. But one thing was certain: the discovery was only the beginning. There were forces at work on Mars, forces that humanity was never meant to awaken, and now they were awake. He had to get back to the outpost. He had to figure out what had just happened before it was too late. The alien energy was not just a danger to Mars. It could be a threat to everything. Mark stumbled through the Martian landscape, his breath ragged and his body drenched in sweat. His mind was still reeling from what had just transpired beneath the surface of Mars. The energy source, the alien crystal that had pulsed with an unnatural life, was no longer just a theory. It was real, and it had made contact with him. As the tremors in the cave subsided, Mark had barely managed to escape, his heart racing with both fear and awe. What had he just witnessed? He had no answers, only fragments of visions, strange sensations, and the undeniable feeling that something ancient and powerful had been awakened beneath Mars. He continued his trek back to the outpost, each step feeling heavier than the last. The weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him like a suffocating force. The energy source, whatever it was, had not only caused the virus that wiped out the colony, but had also stirred something within him. A connection he couldn't explain. It was as if the alien force had reached into his very being, planting seeds of knowledge and understanding that he couldn't yet fully grasp. His mind kept returning to the visions, the vast alien landscapes, the strange beings, and the overwhelming feeling of power radiating from the energy source. It was all connected. But how? And why had it chosen him? Was it calling him? Did it want something from him? He arrived back at the outpost hours later, his suit battered and covered in Martian dust. The life support system was running low, and the oxygen levels in his tank were dangerously close to critical. Mark didn't have much time. He knew he needed to rest and recover, but the urgency of the situation was too great. The alien energy was still out there, and it wasn't finished with him. As he entered the outpost, the familiar hum of the station's weak systems greeted him. The lights flickered on and off, but it was enough to feel like he was back in some semblance of safety, even though he knew it was temporary. The place felt abandoned, empty. Yet somehow there was still a strange sense of life here, a faint pulse beneath the surface, as if the station itself was alive, responding to the energy below. He collapsed in front of the console, removing his helmet with trembling hands. His face was pale, his eyes wild from the stress and exhaustion. He reached for the communication panel, desperate to contact Earth again to get any kind of response. But the screen remained dark, as it had every other time he tried. Mark cursed under his breath. Every day, every attempt to reach Earth had been futile. The systems were failing, and yet there was still the nagging feeling that someone out there was listening, waiting for him to make the right connection. His eyes flicked back to the map of the Martian cave system he had downloaded earlier. The coordinates from the alien energy source were marked in red on the screen. The question burned in his mind. Why had it chosen to reveal itself to him? Why not someone else? Someone more qualified to handle such an encounter? He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to focus. Keep it together, he told himself. There was still time. He had to figure out what the energy source wanted, and if it was connected to the fate of humanity, if Mars had been the catalyst for something much bigger than himself. Just as his thoughts spiraled into confusion, a soft sound came from the communications panel. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Had the system somehow come back online? He rushed to the console, fingers hovering over the buttons. The static was heavy, but then a voice broke through. Faint, distorted, but undeniably real. Mark, are you there? This is Isaac. Do you hear me? Mark's breath caught in his throat. Isaac! He had almost given up on ever hearing from anyone again, but there it was, a lifeline. I hear you, Mark gasped, his voice trembling with relief. Isaac, is it really you? Is help finally on the way? There was a long pause, and the static crackled louder, the voice distorting into almost nothingness. But then Isaac's voice broke through again, softer now, tinged with desperation. We've been trying to get to you for weeks, Mark. The situation is worse than we thought. The virus, the energy source, it's spreading, and we need you to stop it. You've awakened something, Mark. Something that could destroy us all. Mark's blood ran cold. His grip tightened around the edge of the console. Spreading? Destroy us all? What are you talking about, Isaac? Mark's voice was frantic. What happened? What do I need to do? Right? Isaac's voice wavered, as though he were speaking from miles away. We've detected strange energy readings emanating from Mars, from beneath the surface. The energy source you found, whatever it is, it's linked to the virus. The outbreak wasn't just a biological weapon, it's a symbiotic organism, Mark. It attaches itself to living beings and uses them as hosts. It's spreading to any life it can find. And right now, it's starting to adapt. It's learning. If it reaches Earth... The transmission sputtered, and the voice faded into silence once more. Mark's pulse quickened. Adapt? The alien energy source was evolving, learning from its encounters with humanity. It wasn't just a passive force, it was intelligent. Isaac! Mark shouted, desperately trying to reconnect, but the static only deepened. The screen went dark, the communication was lost. For a moment, Mark just sat there in stunned silence. His heart hammered in his chest as the weight of Isaac's words sank in. The energy source wasn't just some alien artifact buried beneath Mars. It was a living, reactive force, capable of learning, adapting, and spreading. The virus had been the first phase. The energy source had unleashed it upon the colony, but now it was evolving, and soon it could move beyond Mars. Mark knew that whatever it was, whatever he had awakened, it could not be allowed to reach Earth. The fate of humanity depended on him stopping it before it was too late. With a new sense of urgency, Mark grabbed his equipment. He couldn't waste any more time. The clock was ticking. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was fighting for the future of all humanity. The alien energy source wasn't just a mystery. It was a weapon, and he was going to find a way to destroy it before it could destroy everything. Mark stood before the battered communications console, his fingers trembling as he rewired the system in a frantic attempt to re-establish contact with Isaac. The static-filled screen was his only link to the outside world, and now that it had gone silent, the silence of Mars felt even more suffocating. The darkness of the cave system, the alien energy, the virus, and Isaac's ominous warning, everything was converging into a single, overwhelming reality. He glanced at the map of the Martian cave system again, studying the coordinates where the alien energy had been discovered. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a living organism, a threat that had already claimed the colony and was now evolving. He had to stop it before it could reach Earth. The tension in his chest was unbearable. He couldn't afford to fail. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. A new plan. He grabbed his equipment, his helmet, life support pack, and a makeshift weapon he had crafted from various salvageable parts, and strapped it to his back. He didn't have much time. The energy source beneath Mars was growing stronger, and with every passing moment, it was adapting, learning. If it spread, it could easily find its way to Earth. where it would wreak havoc far beyond what he could imagine. His pulse quickened as he stepped toward the exit, the dusty winds of Mars howling outside. There was no turning back now. He had to find a way to destroy the alien entity, or at least neutralize it before it could evolve further. He had learned so much in the past few days, but there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. Why had this force been buried beneath Mars? What purpose did it serve? And why had it been awakened now, at this exact moment in human history? The descent. Mark began the long journey to the caves once more, his steps heavy in the Martian dust. The horizon before him seemed to stretch endlessly, the deep red plains broken only by jagged rocks and the occasional, distant ridge. It was eerily quiet, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him with every step. As he neared the cave entrance, he could feel a faint hum in the air. It was almost imperceptible, like a low vibration in his bones, and it grew louder the closer he got to the source of the energy. His mind raced. This was it, the heart of the storm. The alien energy, the force that had set this chain of events in motion, lay just beneath the surface. The entrance to the caves loomed before him, dark and foreboding. The walls were covered with the strange symbols he had seen earlier, but now they seemed more alive, almost as if they were shifting in the dim light. The very rock beneath his feet seemed to vibrate as if reacting to his presence. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the energy source was aware of him, watching, waiting. But there was no turning back. He had come too far. He entered the cave, the cold, damp air wrapping around him like a blanket. His footsteps echoed off the walls, and the further he ventured, the more oppressive the silence became. The glow of his flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but he could feel the weight of something ancient, something vast, pressing down on him. The cave system twisted and turned, a maze of narrow tunnels and vast chambers. Mark's mind raced as he thought of the energy readings from the control panel back at the outpost. The source of the energy had to be deep within the labyrinth, and if he didn't find it soon, the entire Martian environment might begin to change ways that couldn't be undone. The pulse of Mars. He reached the cavern where the alien energy had been discovered. The ground here was cracked, and the air felt thick, almost alive. The strange crystalline formations he had seen earlier still pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow, but now their vibrancy had increased. It was as if they were reacting to his presence, and a deep, almost rhythmic hum echoed through the walls. Mark felt a surge of unease wash over him. He could sense that whatever had been dormant for centuries was now stirring. It wasn't just a physical force, it was an intelligence, and it knew he was here. He stepped cautiously into the center of the cavern. The crystals now loomed before him, their glow brighter, their hum more intense. The ground beneath his feet trembled. The air seemed to thicken, and he felt an overwhelming pressure on his chest, as if the very atmosphere were closing in on him. A sudden flash of light erupted from the center of the cavern, blinding him. Mark staggered back, shielding his eyes, but the light was too intense. It filled the cavern, flowing into every crevice, lighting up the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The crystals seemed to pulse in time with the light, their energy becoming more pronounced with each passing moment. As the light receded, Mark felt something shift in the air. The hum was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, a force, like an ancient intelligence that was awakening, reaching out to him. The walls of the cave seemed to echo with a voice, not one he could hear, but one he could feel. A thought that brushed against his mind like a whisper in the dark. "You are here." Mark froze. His pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat. The energy source, it was speaking to him. "We are not what you think." The voice, though silent, was clear. It was not a human voice, but something older, more primal. Mark's mind raced. Was it truly alive? Was it conscious? And if it was, what did it want from him? The vibrations in the air grew stronger, and the ground beneath his feet began to shake. He stumbled, feeling the cavern tremble with an increasing intensity. The alien force was reacting to his presence, and he was certain it had just realized that it wasn't alone. It wasn't just dormant, it was aware. And now it was reacting to the intrusion. A decision. As Mark's heart raced, his eyes locked onto the glowing crystals. The energy was pulsing now, sending ripples of power through the very fabric of the cave. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Whatever this force was, it was growing stronger, adapting faster than he had ever anticipated. He had no time to figure out what it truly was. The choice was clear. He had to neutralize it before it could escape this cave and spread across Mars and potentially beyond. Mark reached for the weapon he had built, a makeshift device designed to emit a high-frequency pulse capable of disrupting electronic and energy systems. It wasn't perfect, but it was his best shot. He had no other options. He aimed the device at the core of the crystal structure, taking a deep breath before activating it. The pulse shot out with a low hum, striking the heart of the alien source. For a moment, nothing happened. The cave remained still, the crystals glowing softly. Then the energy shifted. The hum grew louder, more frantic, like a scream in the air. The ground trembled violently beneath him, and the walls cracked as if the cave itself was breaking apart. Mark staggered backward, the realization hitting him hard. He had only just started to understand the power of this force, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. The alien energy had not been destroyed. It was evolving. And now Mark had just made it angry. The cave shook violently beneath Mark's feet as the pulse from his weapon resonated through the heart of the alien energy source. A deep, low rumble vibrated the ground, echoing through the walls as though the very core of Mars was reacting to his intrusion. The walls of the cavern cracked further, the glowing crystals pulsing in sync with the increasingly frantic vibrations. Mark stumbled back, his breath quickening as the realization hit him like a freight train. He had done something powerful. But whether it was the right move, he couldn't yet tell. The vibrations intensified, and a sudden gust of wind howled through the cavern, pushing Mark off balance. He grasped at the rocky floor, his heart pounding in his chest as the air thickened, becoming heavy with something unidentifiable. The once faint hum now reverberated loudly, almost like a scream building up in the depths of the cave. The light from the crystalline structures flared, now erratic and violent, sending jagged shadows dancing across the cave walls. The energy felt alive, and it was angry. Mark's mind raced as he took in his surroundings, looking for any escape, any safe place to hide. But there was nowhere. The alien force had taken hold of the cavern, and its power was too much for Mark to control. "You should not have come." The voice was no longer a faint whisper. It was louder now, deeper, vibrating within Mark's skull, filling every part of him. The alien presence had fully awakened, and it was aware of his intrusion. It wasn't just a force, it was something conscious, something ancient, with a mind and purpose of its own. The air around him began to distort, the space rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The ground trembled once more as a massive shift in the cave walls occurred. Mark braced himself as a deep, rumbling sound filled the cavern, like the earth itself was cracking open. Out of the darkness, shapes began to form, shifting masses of glowing crystalline tendrils, stretching and growing from the walls, reaching toward him. They moved with a disturbing fluidity, like sentient beings made of stone and light, converging on his position. His heart raced. What the hell is that? The tendrils pulsed with energy, the glow from the crystals now blinding. Mark's instinct told him to run, but his body froze in place. The energy, this intelligence, had grown too powerful to escape. His mind screamed for him to act, but his legs refused to obey. The alien force had trapped him, surrounded him. There was nowhere to go. "You are the intruder," the voice came again, now calm but laced with an undeniable fury. "You have awakened the sleeping ones. You have disturbed the balance." Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. The weapon in his hand, the device he had built to disrupt the energy source, now felt like nothing more than a toy, a futile attempt to combat something far beyond his understanding. He tried to push the panic aside, focusing instead on his training and the mission. He had to finish what he started. He had to find a way to stop this force before it could break free of Mars. He could feel it. This energy, this presence, was spreading through the cave, through the planet. It was learning, adapting, growing stronger by the second. But how could he stop it? Mark's eyes scanned the cavern. The glowing tendrils reached further now, pulsing faster, converging like the many arms of an ancient, hungry creature. He felt a strange compulsion pulling at him, as if the energy was calling to him. It wanted to connect. It wanted him to understand. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, focusing on the eerie hum, the rhythm of the crystals. And then it hit him. The pulse he had sent earlier hadn't disrupted the energy. It had only amplified it. It was feeding off his presence, using it to strengthen itself. The realization was enough to make his stomach drop. The more he tried to fight it, the more he fed it. A plan formed in his mind, but it was a desperate one. It was a gamble. Mark lifted his makeshift weapon, taking aim at the largest cluster of crystals ahead. He had to overload it, make the energy source collapse in on itself. But he had to be quick. Time was running out. "What are you doing?" The voice now echoed in his mind as if it was reading his thoughts. "You cannot destroy what is eternal." Mark didn't answer. He fired the weapon at the crystal formation, channeling every last bit of his strength and determination into the pulse. There was a brief moment of quiet, then a sudden explosion of light, so bright and intense that Mark had to shield his eyes. The force from the explosion was immediate, throwing him backward into the stone wall of the cave. The air crackled with energy, the ground beneath him shaking violently. The crystal formations around him flickered and pulsed, their once steady glow now erratic, flashing like the dying beats of a heart. Mark struggled to his feet, gasping for breath as the sound of the explosion still echoed in his ears. The cave was alive with the crackling of energy, the air thick with the hum of an angry intelligence. But something was different now. The energy felt unstable, volatile, like it was beginning to implode. The alien presence seemed to recoil, pulling away from him, and Mark felt the pressure in the cave lessen, if only slightly. The crystals no longer pulsed in rhythm. They flickered, their energy unstable, and the air began to clear. But Mark knew it wasn't over. He had only bought himself a little time. The alien force was learning, adapting, but it was also hurt, and that made it more dangerous than ever. As he stumbled toward the exit, Mark glanced back one last time at the collapsing cavern. The energy was not gone, it was merely retreating, gathering its strength. It would return, and next time it might be more than he could handle. He had made it out alive for now, but the alien intelligence was still out there, still growing. And if Mark didn't find a way to finish what he had started, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for Mars, but for Earth as well. He couldn't let it escape. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Mark's boots kicked up the Martian dust as he staggered through the narrow corridors of the outpost, his body bruised and battered from the violent tremors of the cave. His helmet felt heavy, the oxygen supply in his suit dangerously low, but there was no time to worry about that now. Every step he took felt like an eternity. The alien energy was still out there, growing stronger with every passing moment, and he had to act fast before it spread beyond Mars. His thoughts raced, still haunted by the collapse of the cave behind him. The energy source had retreated for now, but he knew it wasn't defeated. It had only been wounded, and like any predator, it would be more dangerous as it recovered. Mark had done what he could, but he realized now that the fight was far from over. The true battle was just beginning. He reached the control room, the familiar hum of the outpost's life support systems barely audible over the ringing in his ears. His hands trembled as he accessed the communication panel once again. The static on the screen was deafening, but he wasn't about to give up now. He punched in the coordinates, desperate to reach Isaac to get the guidance and support he needed. "Come on! Come on!" Mark muttered to himself, desperation seeping into his voice. The screen flickered. Mark's heart skipped a beat. For a split second, he thought he saw something, faint, distorted shadows moving across the screen. Then a voice, familiar but strained, broke through the static. "Mark, can you hear me?" Isaac's voice came through, shaky but unmistakable. "I hear you," Mark replied, barely able to contain the relief that surged through him. "Isaac, I need help. The energy source, it's still alive. I can't stop it on my own. It's growing. It's evolving." The static crackled, and Mark gritted his teeth, leaning in closer to the screen, trying to catch every word. "We know, Mark," Isaac's voice came again, softer this time. "We've been tracking the readings from Earth. Whatever that thing is, it's more than just energy. It's not just a force, it's a consciousness, and it's spreading faster than we anticipated. It's adapting to everything we throw at it. It's not just a weapon, it's an organism." Mark's mind raced as the weight of Isaac's words sank in. The alien energy was more than just a foreign force. It was alive, a sentient entity that could learn, evolve, and adapt. And it was out of control. "Is there anything we can do?" Mark asked urgently. "Anything left to try?" "We're sending reinforcements," Isaac said, his voice heavy with concern. "But it's going to take time. The virus, everything. We're dealing with a catastrophic situation here. We need you to hold on, Mark. We need to contain that energy before it spreads to Earth. Boris, you have to destroy it." Mark looked out of the window, staring at the Martian horizon as the weight of his mission pressed down on him. He had been alone for so long, surrounded by nothing but the echoes of the past. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. Mars wasn't just a barren landscape, it was a battlefield. And the enemy wasn't just some virus, it was a living, breathing intelligence. "I won't fail you," Mark said, determination flooding his voice. "I'll do whatever it takes." Isaac's voice was full of resolve, but there was an underlying sense of urgency. "Mark, time is running out. You don't have much longer. That energy, it's not just reacting to you, it's learning from you. And once it has everything it needs, it won't just be a threat to Mars. It'll be a threat to the entire solar system." Mark clenched his fists, staring at the map on the console in front of him. The coordinates he had marked earlier, the location of the alien energy, were still fresh in his mind. The battle to stop the force from spreading was his responsibility now. The path forward was clear, even if the outcome was uncertain. "I'll stop it," Mark said, his voice steady. "I'll make sure it doesn't leave Mars. I'll find a way to destroy it." The journey to the core. With Isaac's voice fading into the static, Mark turned away from the console, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through him. He knew what he had to do. The alien energy had retreated, but it wasn't defeated. He needed to go deeper into Mars, to the very heart of the planet where the energy source had originated. Only there could he end it once and for all. The journey back to the cave system would be even more dangerous than before. The alien energy would be aware of his approach now, and it would try to stop him. But Mark had no choice. If he didn't act, the consequences would be dire. Not just for Mars, but for Earth too. He couldn't let it escape. Mark began his descent once again, the narrow tunnels of Mars's subterranean labyrinth stretching out before him. His footsteps echoed in the silence, his breath steady as he made his way back to the heart of the storm. The further he went, the more the vibrations in the air intensified. The alien energy was reacting to his presence, growing more agitated with each passing moment. Mark's body tensed, every nerve on high alert. He knew the final confrontation was near. The ground shook beneath him, and the walls of the cavern seemed to pulse with an ominous rhythm. He had only moments before the full force of the energy would be unleashed. The air grew heavy, thick with the power that resonated from the core. Mark could feel the cave itself was alive, pulsing with ancient, alien consciousness. It was watching him. He reached the heart of the cavern, the site of the original discovery. The crystal formations that had once been glowing faintly were now ablaze with light. They pulsed with an intensity that made his suit hum with static. The alien force was there, in the very air, in the very ground. It had fully awakened, and it knew he was there. Mark stood before the source, the alien energy now fully realized. His mind raced with all that he had learned. He had to destroy it, completely, without hesitation. He activated the device he had been carrying, a high-frequency pulse emitter capable of releasing a destabilizing energy wave. It was his final weapon, the only one that could counter the energy. "Goodbye," Mark whispered to the entity, his voice trembling with the weight of everything he had witnessed, everything he had fought for. He aimed the device at the center of the alien formation. The pulse hummed to life, growing louder and louder as the cavern around him seemed to tremble in response. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he pressed the button, releasing the pulse into the heart of the alien energy. The cavern shook violently. The crystal formations shattered, sending shards of glowing rock flying into the air. The energy in the cave screamed, an unearthly, deafening sound, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then, with a final explosion of light and force, the energy collapsed. The cave went silent, the glow fading into nothingness. The weight of the tension lifted from Mark's chest as the vibrations died away. It was over. The alien force had been neutralized. Mark stood there, breathing heavily, his body trembling from the exertion. The mission was complete, but the cost had been high. He had destroyed the threat, but the consequences of what he had witnessed on Mars would stay with him forever. The isolation, the fear, and the knowledge of what had been buried beneath the surface of the red planet. The darkness of Mars had been beaten back, but Mark knew that the battle to protect humanity would never truly end. As he turned to leave the cave, he glanced back one last time, a quiet sense of resolution settling over him. He had survived, but more than that, he had won. For now. Thank you for watching this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling adventures. Your support means the world. Stay tuned for the next chapter. And remember, the truth is always out there.